Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones here with us to talk about networking during the coronavirus crisis. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan, and typically I'm with Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're excited to have ex-BigLaw recruiter Sadie Jones with us to talk about networking in quarantine, combining everyone's two favorite topics, networking and the coronavirus. So welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. This was actually based on a listener question, so send those in. And we thought it was a really good question. So this person is interested in BigLaw, and they'd even had some preliminary interviews before all of this started, but they're now wondering how to stay on the radar of potential employers all these extra months until the winter of 2021 when they're going to be doing, the sort of OCI hiring. And I can see this really being an issue for lots of different type of jobs, even possibly for permanent positions after law school. And part of this is just, people are distracted. So what are some of the issues we're looking at here?
I think there's kind of two major buckets. One is just that it's such an extended period of time and so many things are going to happen between now and then that it's hard to kind of stay on everyone's radar. And the other thing is that you may have limited opportunities to meet people in person and do different activities. So the things you would normally turn to, you don't really have to stay in touch. Right. So I see those as kind of the two biggest issues.
Yeah, you can't offer just to go for coffee or for lunch with someone that you met or that someone you know from your prior job that you want to stay in touch with. You may have less access to career services. They may not actively be putting on events. And certainly you're going to have more limited in-person networking. School events may not be happening, bar association events, career fairs, even pro bono work, which can be a good networking opportunity depending on what you're interested in. I think is going to be a lot harder to do, and certainly to do in person. Plus, I think you have to combine that with just the general fatigue and burnout, with life and work that I think is just making people less receptive. I know I definitely feel like I do not have a lot of extra capacity right now. So those people who might have been perfectly willing to say, okay, sure, I'd love to go get a coffee with you and get out of the office for an hour, may not be willing to do that.
Yeah, I think everyone's focus is sort of on all sorts of other things. And so if you bring it back to, your job search or what you're looking for, I think people just, may need to have sort of a refresher about what's going on because they're,
who are you?
Focused on other things. Exactly. What is this about?
What is this person? Why are you contacting me? That being said, I don't think it's hopeless, right?
Definitely not. I think that it's kind of about stepping out of the way, you normally do things, or advice we've given before about how to network and how to do all these things, and kind of step back and say, what are other ways to do it? Because there are always other ways to do it. And I think right now I've noticed people kind of coming up with a lot of creative solutions about how to do things in this environment. And so I think you kind of can jump on that bandwagon.
Yeah, what do you have any specific ideas? I have some, but give me your thoughts.
I think all the things, that you would normally do in person, I think a lot of opportunities are available virtually for sort of speakers, events, all of these Zoom things, and I think you can join as many of them as you can, in a way. Maybe there's less pressure because you're just doing it from home, so it doesn't involve going anywhere or, getting to anything. So in a way, I think you could kind of sign up for more things, that you normally could. So I think that's one thing. I think you can also kind of stay in touch with people through current articles and things that are going on in the legal world, things you read. If you hear about somebody and something, kind of ping them on that. There are still regular things happening outside of coronavirus and other things that we talk about a lot.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you mentioned you could join a Zoom call of some type. I think that's also a great way to follow up with someone. If somebody is on that call as a speaker or whatnot, is going to have much more impact if you reach out to them and say, hey, I went to this event online and I really was very interested in what you had to say. Here's an article you might find interesting, or like, here's a specific question I have. Do you have any advice around that? Because then people know that you're legitimately interested, and you're not just sort of there to check a box.
Definitely. And reference something specific so they know you actually listened.
Right.
And we're there for the whole thing. I think that's really important. Yeah. That you're not just saying you were there, because I do think some people sort of do that.
Yeah. I'm always a big fan of sending people relevant articles. Maybe that's a law review article that you've come across. Maybe it's just, something you saw on the internet. Anytime somebody takes the time to think, oh, Alison might really be interested in this, and then they send it to me, typically I'm, pretty appreciative of that, and I sort of like them. I'm like, oh, wow, that isn't, assuming it's actually an interesting article. This is not a great thing to do if you're one of those people who just wants to put promoted links on our website. We don't do that. Don't send me your stupid article. I don't care. I will tell you to go away. I might or may not be polite about it. But, I think one thing that's kind of overlooked that's really easy is you can set up a Google alert for, say, people that you want to have an excuse to reach out to. So say that there's somebody at a firm that you're really interested in working at, and you want to have an excuse to reach out to them. Set up a Google alert for their name, and you're probably going to find out, did they win a big case? Did they write an article? Are they showing up online? It's kind of amazing. Anytime I set up a Google alert, I'm always really surprised by how much I get back.
Absolutely. And then I think, you're being really specific, and you're making the effort. And I think that is surprisingly very above and beyond what a lot of people really do. And it's such a simple thing.
Yeah, exactly. The bar is pretty low here, let's be honest. So I think sometimes people do get really worked up about like, oh, whatever I'm sending them is not good enough. If you send them anything that is relevant, or you send them a compliment based on an actual thing that happened, that's pretty, you're meeting that bar.
Definitely, because I think most people just don't bother.
No, exactly.
So when you think it's not enough, just being in that situation probably is enough.
Right. Or even, I read this article that you posted. I thought it was really interesting. I just want to say thanks for writing it. Even something like that shows that you made a little bit of effort, which is surprisingly rare. One thing I think, again, is overlooked, and I think this is overlooked in, kind of non-virtual space, but probably in the virtual space as well. Are you in a club at your school that's organizing some type of speaker event? This is actually a really great way to reach out to someone that you want to know better, because you can ask them as an expert to come and do a call, a video chat, whatever it is. And then it positions you to kind of shepherd them through that process, and you get to go back and forth with them and email and whatever. Maybe you have a call to talk about what they're going to talk about. It's a really great way actually to build a relationship.
Definitely. And I think the thing to remember here is the employers want that relationship.
Right.
They want to be involved. You're not bothering them. This is something that they get to do to build relationships with the school and, your club, whatever it is. So that's something that kind of helps everybody. And if you're organized about it and you sort of have a plan, they're going to really appreciate that. So like kind of the legwork that you can do to make it easy for them, I think will go really far. It will be impressive.
Yeah, I think you should make it as easy as possible. Like, hey, this is our process for setting this up. All you would need to do is call in at this time. We'll provide you a list of questions. We'll have a moderator, whatever it is. I think, you want to make it simple. You don't want to sort of be like, hey, can you come talk for an hour? Because that's pretty intimidating. But depending on what your organization is like, here are 10 questions that people are interested in. Could you pick a few of them and talk about that? And then we'll leave time for questions. Like most people who are experts are willing, that's not that big of an ask.
And in this environment, assuming that it's virtual, make sure that you make it super easy for them to join and understand whatever the technology is, and make sure that's, all set up so that they're not going to feel like intimidated by that part of it.
Right. And also make sure the audience understands that they should be on mute and all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Because exactly.
You don't want 20 people not on mute with stuff going on in the background. You probably want to do a trial run.
But I think putting on something like that and having it work is going to reflect really well on you. So I think it's something that can be fairly easy, if you put a little effort into it, and actually will go really far. So I think that's a great thing. And it's something that is easy to do in this environment, virtually, all that.
Right. And I think afterwards, if you send a nice thank you card or a very small gift, minimal thank you email that's very thoughtful, people are going to remember that.
Definitely. And then when we can see each other, you can talk about, meeting in person and, reference the event, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously a lot of this is depending on where you are, in the country. Some places are more open than others. And I think there you just have to be sort of cognizant of what people would be comfortable with in terms of meeting in person and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Not just assume we're all going back to normal immediately, like we can meet in a crowded coffee shop. I think
maybe offer them two options, like so that they don't feel uncomfortable. If you can meet in person, maybe you can offer an option that's like outside or kind of safer, or you can say that you're happy to not do it in person, just to give them the option and not make it like uncomfortable for anybody.
Yeah, because I think certain people are still kind of like, wait, are you joking? Like that doesn't seem like a good idea to me. So I would just tread carefully around, what the expectations are in your particular community. All right. I think also, we kind of touched on this briefly, but I think asking people for advice can be a reasonable way to network and get to know somebody, but you have to do this pretty carefully.
Definitely. I think that there is a way to do this that people really enjoy. Particularly lawyers love giving advice.
Lawyers love talking about themselves.
But I think you have to kind of be specific about what you're looking for, and make sure that I think it's important to be genuine here. Are you really looking for advice?
Right.
And are there things that they're going to tell you that you're going to actually follow up on? Because I think that's something that really comes out. If it doesn't seem genuine, it's just like an excuse to talk to them, and it's not like a practice area you're really interested in or you don't know anything about it. I think do your homework.
Absolutely. It's pretty annoying when you get those emails that are like, I'm not sure if I want to be a lawyer. Can you tell me? And I'm like, no. Yeah. Like, this is
exactly.
what do you want me to tell you? Like, go do your research. But if somebody comes and says, this is my background and like, I would really like your advice because you have a similar background and what are your thoughts around X, Y, and Z? Like, I'm much more likely to respond to that.
Well, I think it's always great to ask people, you're really interested in their career path. How did they get from this to that? That's something you're really interested in. You want to be in X practice area, whatever it is. I think people really appreciate that. And then they see like you read their bio, kind of, how they got from one thing to the next.
Well, I was going to say that you need to know the LinkedIn answer to that question before you write to them. It's like, hey, you're doing this type of work. How did you get there? It's like, well, have you looked at LinkedIn? Like that pretty much shows you how I got here. Right. So yeah, you've got to make some effort. And I think this can also work better for people who explicitly made themselves more open to mentoring, whether it's via an affinity group or other type of organization. If somebody's basically said, like, I want to help the next generation, those people, probably are more likely to be helpful.
Absolutely. And I think the thing to remember in this sort of mentor-mentee relationship is that it is halfway on the mentee as well. You're not just waiting for somebody to guide you and tell you what to do. Sometimes it's more than half on the mentee, because I feel like it's kind of usually on the more junior person to set things up. In a lot of ways and sort of steer the agenda. So the other person's giving you advice, but you're kind of doing the legwork. And that's something that I think is important because you kind of want to make it easier for the other person.
Right. And, they're probably busy. So say that you worked at a job after your first summer or even before law school and you had people that you either connected with or maybe you hadn't explicitly had a mentor assigned. I think that's a great person to just reach out to occasionally, like, hey, I was just thinking about you. Like, how is it working remotely these days? Like, how's life going? I think people are generally pretty open to that.
Absolutely. So I think it's kind of about how you do it. And I wouldn't be too worried about, kind of bothering people, because I think anyone who sort of puts themselves in that position to be a mentor usually wants to do it.
Right. Within reason. I mean, if somebody's at trial or something, then maybe they're not going to write you back. But generally speaking, I think, keeping in touch via short articles or emails, just checking in is always a good idea. Another underlooked resource, I think, if you're really thinking specifically about job networking, is, are there people at your school who had the job that you want in previous years? They might be easier to approach, whether this is students who were a class or two ahead of you, or even alums. And sometimes they even hold sway if they recommend people. I mean, I've had people contact me randomly out of the blue who are applying for clerkships with the judge that I worked for. And I was happy to talk to them.
I think it's such an underutilized resource. And also, just even if you're not specifically looking for something, maybe it's somewhere that you want to apply to, so you want to hear what their experience was like. Because someone sort of close to where you are, I think it's going to give you the best idea, of what it's like and kind of the path and how to do things. And I think for clerkships, that's particularly helpful.
Oh, for sure. I mean, judges...
But same for summer associates, yeah.
Judges definitely don't want to make a bad hire. So they are very highly incentivized to find a person who is going to do a good job, because they are basically stuck with that person.
Yes. But I have heard a lot of students kind of be worried about it, that they don't want to bother people, that kind of thing. And I don't think that's usually the reaction in this situation. I think usually they want to help.
Yeah, I think particularly if it's the alumni network. I mean, when I was looking at clerkships and I had interviews, I definitely reached out to the people that I knew. My school had collected data on who had clerked for whom. And I went for everybody I had an interview with, if there were people who had clerked for that judge, I wrote them an email and basically said, hey, I've got an interview. Like, would you be willing to talk to me? And most of them did. And I found out all kinds of interesting stuff and useful information. I think generally speaking, people like to help other people from their school. I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons you go to a school, is that you then get access to their network.
Definitely. And I think the thing to remember here is you should pass that along when you're in that position. So that's something to remember too. So if somebody helps you, pay it forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've touched on this indirectly a couple of times. This was actually part of the question that we got originally. How can people avoid feeling like they're really being a pest and being like annoying here?
So I know this is kind of one of those things, at least to me, that's sort of like it when you see it.
Well, if you're on the receiving end.
Right. But I think even if you're the person doing it, I kind of think that people, if they really look at themselves, they know, like, this is too much.
I don't know, man. Maybe I'm just thinking of a bad recent dating app situation where I was just like, how can you not see that this is not appropriate?
Okay, not everybody. But I think some people also don't want to see it, so if they really, like, stop for a second and looked at it, they might. So I would say, it's always fine for sure to follow up once, especially if, you've given it a certain amount of time, and kind of keep in mind if they said anything like they had something specific going on or they wouldn't be able to get back to you for X amount of time. I think once. I think maybe a second follow-up, if you wait a bit and hopefully have something like specific to say, like you said, an article, something useful. I think after 2, I'd probably be done. That's like the point to me where if you haven't heard back, like they're not interested, and you can kind of cut it off. But I think you just kind of, I guess I think it's like a common sense issue. I think the 2 would be kind of my number. I
mean, if you're asking yourself this question, then presumably you are not a person who really has this problem. It's the people who are sending 4 or 5 unresponded to messages, which I will say was on this dating app. And, at that point, you kind of have to assume the person is not interested. I mean, don't make them spell it out for you. And also, you're the one asking for help. So you're asking for a favor. That's one of my pet peeves, is when people kind of don't have that positioning, that they're actually asking you to do them a favor. And they're just, I guess I don't know, not into entitlement, particularly these days. I think if you're making a genuine attempt to connect, I think people are likely to be fairly flattered. And then it's really a question of, do they have the bandwidth for this? And understandably, right now, a lot of people just don't have bandwidth.
And don't take it personally. You can move on to a different person, and there's somebody who I promise will want to help and will get back to you. And some people are sort of better at this than others.
Right.
That kind of, keeping up with their emails. And that's why I think if you followed up twice over a period of time, like you've given them a chance to see it, if they're not getting back to you, there's a reason. They have other things going on. They don't have the space for this right now, or they're just not interested in helping, or maybe they were and they're not anymore. Whatever it is, don't take it personally. Just move on. It is sort of similar to dating.
Right.
Take a hint.
Yeah,
but I think it's fine to have some follow up because people do sort of forget.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people appreciate that. Oh yeah, I meant to get back to you. I'm so sorry.
I meant to get back to you, but instead I had to go out and protest. Things like that. And also I think people need to be aware of what else is going on in the world. If suddenly the world is blown up and everyone's very distracted and busy doing things they didn't think they were going to be doing, then of course they're probably not sitting on their email waiting for a law student to nag them about something.
And know the time and place. Don't use a week, that's particularly crazy to, throw this out, because I think that can be kind of tone deaf.
Yeah, exactly. I think you want to pay attention to what's happening in the world and your audience and all of these things, and just be thoughtful. I think being thoughtful when you're networking is really one of the most important things, because what you're really trying to do here, when it comes right down to it, to do this successfully, is you're trying to build relationships.
Absolutely. And the advantage to having such a long period of time is that there is a lot of time. So you can go to somebody else, or you can follow up, you can take longer. So that's kind of the good news, because sometimes you are really rushed between the time where you're looking for a job and you have to get a job. So the thing about this is you have more time to sort of think about it and develop these relationships.
Yeah, and I think you want to be strategic about it. Really think about what am I asking for? Can this person really help? What do I want this person to do? A very specific ask is generally better than something that's very generic, because it's just really hard for people if you come to them and you're like, oh, I'm interested in getting a job.
Yes.
Okay, what do you want me to do with that information?
Or I think some people kind of look at their network, oh, I know a lawyer. Maybe that's the person I should, get into contact with. And I do think you have to ask yourself why.
Right.
Where do they work? What is their, background? Just because, they're in the legal field doesn't mean they're necessarily the right person to talk to right now about what you're looking for.
Right, but I think you can also start with that if you literally know one lawyer.
Yeah.
And you can say, but you need to approach that person in the spirit of, hey, I know that you're probably not the exact right person for me to talk to about this, but I don't really have a ton of other options. And, do you know people who may be willing to do an informational interview with me? And the girls.
Exactly. That's the ask.
Yeah.
Is there somebody else you could put me in touch with, or be specific about an area, or the type of job you're looking for. Try to do that legwork first.
Right. And that's one of our pet peeves, as anyone who's listened to most of these know, is you need to have your story and what you're looking for ready to go, and not make the other person do that work to sort of help you figure out what it is that you want. It's much easier for someone to help you get something that you have already identified as a goal than to help you figure out what you're... if you don't have a goal, I think you need to have a career counselor on call, basically.
Absolutely. And I think, even if the actual goal is just to, let's say, find a 1L summer job, you need to figure out something more specific than that to tell people, because that's not a good ask. I just need a 1L summer job.
Yeah, that looks desperate.
Yeah, start somewhere.
Right. It doesn't have to be super, super specific. It could just be I'm interested in finding a public interest 1L summer job, or something doing, this type of law, or working in this type of organization. And frankly, if you're at that level, I would say you also need to be having that conversation more with someone in career services than someone that you're trying to network with.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I think you can also talk to different people about different areas. It's not like they know what you said to the other person. So you can explore different areas. Yeah, exactly. But I think you just need to be somewhat specific with the different people, and keep that all straight, obviously.
Right. And I think in terms of, networking specifically around these firm jobs, I think another thing to keep in mind is just there's probably going to be a lot of uncertainty in the next, say 6 months or so about what firms are hiring and, how many people they're hiring and how they're hiring and all these things. So I think this may be a time where we're all just going to have to sit with some uncertainty.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great lesson. And, a good experience long term, even if it feels really hard right now. And in the end, I think you will find something. It may not be your first choice or your second choice or even your third choice. But I think in the end, you'll be able to make something work. You're just going to have to go through this process. Yeah,
and I think, my advice on kind of navigating just this uncertain period of extended time that you may be looking is, again, just going back to this idea of you want to be making genuine connections. And if it comes off as if I'm only using you to try to get this job, then of course people are not generally going to be very happy or very receptive to that. So even if that is kind of your ultimate goal, you need to fake it.
Yeah, and I will say that if you're not trying to hide that, people can see it. So even if you don't think they can see it, they can.
Yeah, exactly. You need to kind of sit with that and say, okay, ultimately I am using this person basically to get to a job, but how am I going to do it in a way that is a little bit more genuine than that?
Right. And I just think also making it easier for them is something you're, at least helping with, because it's a big ask.
Yeah, and just having a curiosity about people. I mean, even if ultimately you're hoping they might help you, at least have a curiosity about what you're talking with them about, or have a curiosity about what they're working on or what they're thinking about and writing about, because you just don't know where these leads are really going to end up. And so I think people who are too kind of formulaic about it, oh, I don't want to talk to that person because they're not they don't have a hiring authority. It's okay, whatever, you don't know.
Absolutely. And you don't know where people are going to end up, or how your paths might cross again. So you always want to, put your best foot forward and do your homework and act professional and all of that.
Yeah, I think just try to be a genuine person and make these connections, and then hopefully something pans out. I mean, people like to help the people that they like. I mean, that's just kind of how life works, unfortunately, for some people.
Absolutely. I think that just goes a long way. And like I said, pay it forward when you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if that's just to someone in high school or college who wants advice about being a law student, I think,
Or, the other thing is you may hear something where there is an opportunity. It's not the opportunity for you, but it's the perfect opportunity for somebody else
Right.
And so that's a great thing that you could do to connect them.
Yeah.
And that's something I think even as a law student, you have the opportunity to do.
And that's a really great point, too, that we haven't really touched on, is make sure your friends and your law school classmates know kind of what you're interested in. Because, as you said, opportunities arise that people see all the time. You might even see some random thing on Instagram hey, this organization's having a Zoom call this week that's on an exact topic that you're interested in, thought you might be interested. That's actually networking.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to be a set, idea of what kind of we used to think of traditional networking. I think it's relationship building, and it's putting out there what you're interested in, listening to what other people are interested in, and kind of keeping track of that. And I think just being a connector can be really useful.
Absolutely. I'm reading a really interesting book now called, I think it's About Damn Time, and it's a super interesting story. Everyone should read it. But part of that is she said if you don't have a lot of capital, what you have to have are relationships. And I think that's so true.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think even if you don't know what you can offer, there are things you can offer.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is what you're saying. And so keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think just generally keeping an eye out for something that would be useful for someone else and then sending that opportunity to them. That's only going to help you in the end. Even if it doesn't result directly and 6 weeks later, they send you the perfect opportunity. Yeah. You can't think about it transactionally like that. You're just putting it out in the universe, and then one day it'll all come back to you.
Yeah, I completely believe in that.
All right. Any final thoughts on this topic before we wrap up?
That I hope that everyone sort of uses this time in the best way that they can. And like we talked about, it can you can get fatigue, and it can be hard to keep it up, and it's okay to have sort of ups and downs over this period of time. But I would say keep your eye on the prize, which is a job. And, OCI is going to be in the winter, and that's probably where more of this is going to be happening. So you're building the foundation to get yourself there.
Right, exactly. I think thinking about it in terms of building those relationships for the future is a beneficial way to consider this. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. With that, we're unfortunately out of time. For more career help and the opportunity to work one-on-one with us, you can check out careerdicta.com. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Alison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.